Now, you mentioned you work in 80 countries. Tell me what some of those countries are and how is that going?
More than 80 countries. And they're growing all the time, right? Because the drinking water crisis is something that unfortunately really unites the world, be it the most developed countries and developing countries. So to give you a few examples, right, we're working from the United States to Latin American countries like Guatemala, Argentina, Brazil, to the Middle East, of course. And we've just recently signed an agreement with the UAE, with a major company in the UAE. Okay. To Africa, of course, and then into Asia, Australia, etc. Again, each country has its own drinking water challenge. But I think what's really critical and what we've found is that working with the strongest partners, right, who are addressing this drinking water challenge, be it in the public sector or in the private sector, is really critical. We are experts in creating drinking water from the air, but because it's so important that we attack the drinking water crisis quickly, we also need to make sure that we're working with people who best know how to bring this technology and bring this life-saving solution to their specific countries and communities, and those communities and countries are different from one another. So the approach is important to be local and led together with local partners in order to make sure that it can be deployed as quickly as possible.
Amazing. Now, Ofir, you mentioned COVID-19, which we all know has impacted us in innumerable ways and in every aspect of our lives, including sustainable solutions or sustainability in general. What sustainable innovation trends do you envision in the post-COVID era?
Okay, something that we've started a while before COVID is basically working remotely. This is something which is very important. Like Zach said, he's 80 countries. He said more than 80 countries. We're not there yet. We're going to be there probably very soon. We're in 35 countries, more or less. Today, the fact is that we use the ecosystem, like around the farmers. If it's food conglomerates that we're partnering with or chemical companies, it could be large insurance companies. All of them are always responsible for many small farmers out there. We usually lean on them to expand globally. The fact that you need to be extremely flexible in order to be able to work in different countries, this is something which is very important, especially in software. But I think that in terms of COVID, when you see that suddenly everybody needs to work remotely, I think this is a trend that is going to continue, because now that after 6, 7, almost a year that you see that suddenly you can, this is not something that is going to end. You see, even employees, even in my office, they now get less to the office. This is something that I think is going to continue. Offices will get smaller, but nonetheless, you will see that technologies will need to support it more and more and more. An example of that, of an insurance company that needed to stop going to the field and still know what are the risks that they're taking because of their policies with the farmers. And if you cannot send the people to the field, you need something else in order to do that. And basically we managed to provide them with remote sensing capabilities, being able to determine which areas are at more risk, which are not at risk, so they'll be able to fine-tune where their people are going when they have to go. And I think these trends are going to continue regardless of the COVID. The COVID is just something which is going to expedite that. I believe this is something that is here to stay.
Wow. You mentioned smaller offices, which I guess would help with all the urbanization, but talk a little bit about that and what do you see is going to change post-COVID?
The COVID exposes the weaknesses of the badly planning of the city. The extensive density, the inefficient infrastructure and transport, this is only the tip of the iceberg. As I see it, we have to address 3 key aspects. First is the self-sustaining city. The second one is new live workplace, as you mentioned. Okay, today, if now people used to rent 5,000 square meters of offices, now they will need only a meeting room. Okay, this is what going on in our building where we sit. Okay, and rethink the all urban standard.
Amazing. Now, this conference, as I'm sure you all know, is an international conference. We have people from all around the world listening in, and I thought maybe that each of you would have a message for those leaders and those policymakers. What would be your message in terms of their decision-making when it comes to sustainable technologies? Maggie, actually, let's start with you.
Okay. We need to change the way we think. We should start thinking vertical instead versus horizontal, the same way we did with housing and also transportation. Okay, regulation is a must process that we have to start doing. Okay, when you insert regulation, you create an ecosystem that it is a win-win situation for the owner, for the tenant, and for the city. For example, NGBS organization in United States, they give 50% taxation if you combine several products that are NGBS certified. Okay, so tenants start looking for apartment in NGBS certified buildings.
What is the definition of NGBS? This is to be sustainable?
It's like המועצה לבנייה ירוקה.
Okay, to green building.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Ofir, answer the same question. What is the message that you want to put out there to our leaders?
Well, I'll treat it in more of the focus of working with governments.
Okay.
We have the experience, and we were lucky to work with several governments already in handling or providing solutions that we help the governments to connect and to communicate with the small farm holders, to get the visibility that they need and to support them. And when you get to these types of, work methods with governments, I would suggest that government needs to take a bit of a different approach when it comes to startups and to innovation, which at the end of the day supports the sustainability that they all care about, is to be much more flexible. Sometimes things can take much longer than they should take because people are trying to, specifically governments, try to put very, very long-term roadmaps. These roadmaps are worthless if after the first year you see that everything that you've done was wrong. So basically, I would suggest to change these types of work methods towards something which is more flexible, something which more, you start something and then you check, you stop, and then you continue. So it's not against long-term, it has to be long-term commitment, but the way that it works has to be in phases, much more flexible, like startup are used to working. The second thing is regulatory environment, just from a different perspective, I think that's what you just mentioned. That it's, there are a lot of regulatory constraints sometimes because governments are more used to working with very large organizations. When you want to work with smaller organizations, they sometimes don't have the capabilities or the capacity to put so much effort in trying to comply with regulatory requirements. And this in terms of data security and other things that most of the startups are actually capable of making it up to the standards. It's just that the process that is needed has to be shortened, must be shortened. And on a different notion, governments, I think, can support these startups in basically investing in them and helping them to comply with the future requirements as well. So it's like a kind of adjust the work methods, the way that governments are working with startups to the way that actually startups can succeed. And I say it as looking forward, we've learned a lot from this and we're already past the fact that we can actually work. But I think that for many others that are just starting, this is something that would be very important.
Amazing. And I want to take it to you, Zach, also asking you the same question. What would be your message in terms of their decision making?
I think the message has to be, first of all, that the drinking water crisis is here. It's not a problem that's going to be sort of faced in 5 or 10 years. It's here today.
Can I actually stop you for a minute and just tell us for 1 second, what does that mean it's here? What kind of water crisis? Give us some numbers, give me a little bit of data.
Great question. So as I mentioned at the beginning, right, the drinking water crisis exists both in the developing world, of course, where drinking water sources are running out and there's no infrastructure. But also I think people are more and more familiar with stories that are coming out of places like Flint, Michigan and Baltimore that are happening in Beijing, that are happening in some of the world's most developed cities. And that's because the infrastructure that was built in order to bring water to the people is old and disintegrating, and it's actually poisoning water that may have started out safe but no longer is once it reaches the end user. And this is, of course, Maggie listed a whole list of ills that plague the world. Global warming and pollution are basically destroying water resources, the limited water resources that do exist. So this is a global problem. And like I mentioned, it's something that's from New York City to Madrid to Tokyo to Beijing.
So against that backdrop, now answer the question.
So given that the drinking water crisis is here, right, I think, someone once said that the definition of craziness is to try to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? And there are many different approaches that over the last decades have been taken in order to address, I would say specifically on a specific case-by-case basis, the drinking water crisis. But with the billions and even trillions of dollars that have been spent, unfortunately, we see that the crisis is only becoming worse and worse. So a new approach is required, and I think those 80 countries where WaterGen is already deploying and the countries that are coming online more and more with every passing day, I think it's because they recognize that with a new innovative approach, right, that actually bypasses many of the challenges that the previous drinking water market faced, be it piping, be it a clean drinking water source, etc. They can actually be bypassed, and through innovation, through WaterGen's innovation, we can provide an immediate, safe, premium drinking water solution that can be immediately scaled and deployed rather than continuing to pump in these sort of infinite resources and also, unfortunately, require people to wait. The most important thing is to act now.
Amazing. Well, it's so interesting to hear about all of the different solutions, and it's a great ending to our panel, just thinking about where we can go, how we can be innovative, take the Startup Nation technology out to the world. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Zach, Ofir. It's been great.